The restaurant was her choice, of course. It was the kind of place that wasn't just expensive, but aggressively, performatively expensive. The lighting was dim, the cutlery was heavy, and the waiters all looked like aspiring actors who were deeply disappointed in their life choices. It was the perfect stage for the final act of our marriage. My wife, Amelia, sat across from me, a portrait of cool, polished indifference. She had called this dinner meeting to finalize the terms of our separation. It was a phrase that sounded like it had been lifted from a corporate merger, which in a way it was. "Now, Robert," she began, her voice a low, carefully modulated hum designed to not carry to the adjacent tables. "I want it to be very clear. Let's handle this with dignity. No drama. No theatrics. Don't make a scene." The words hung in the air between us, a preemptive strike against any emotional outburst on my part. She was, as always, trying to manage the narrative, to control the optics. She saw me as the volatile element, the unpredictable variable that needed to be contained. For a long moment, I just looked at her. I saw the woman I had been married to for 15 years, the mother of my 2 children, but I also saw a stranger, a woman whose eyes held a chilling combination of contempt and impatience. She was already gone, and this dinner was just a piece of administrative cleanup for her. I felt a surge of something hot and sharp in my chest, a feeling I had been suppressing for months. But it wasn't just anger, it was a profound, bone-deep weariness of being managed, of being underestimated, of being told to be quiet and play my part in the neat, tidy story she was writing for us. In that moment, something inside me didn't break. It clicked into place with the cold, hard finality of a well-made line. My name is Robert Vance, 49 years old, and for the last 25 years, I have been a theatrical set designer and fabricator. My entire life is about making scenes. I build worlds out of nothing. I create illusions that feel real. I understand lighting, acoustics, sight lines, and the subtle art of drawing an audience's attention exactly where I want it to go. My work is a chaotic, messy, and beautiful blend of art and engineering. Amelia had always hated. She saw my workshop, with its sawdust, paint splatters, and organized chaos, as a source of mild embarrassment. It didn't fit with the clean, minimalist aesthetic of her life as a high-powered art gallery director. She dealt in finished products, in hushed galleries and champagne openings. I dealt in the messy, glorious process of creation. "Don't make a scene," she had said. The irony was so perfect, so profound, it was almost poetic. She had spent years trying to sand down my edges, to make me fit into the smooth, polished frame of her world. And now, at the very end, she was issuing one last directive, one final attempt to control the stage. "All right, Amelia," I said, my voice perfectly calm. "No scene." I took a sip of my water. I listened as she laid out her terms. They were, as expected, brutal. She wanted the house, primary custody of the children, and a significant portion of my business, which she had always dismissed as a hobby, but which she now seemed to think was a lucrative enterprise. She was calm, organized, and utterly ruthless. She had a script, and she was sticking to it. What she didn't know was that I had a script of my own, and I had spent the last 2 months quietly, methodically, and creatively, building the set for a final performance she would never forget. She thought this was a private 2-person drama. She had no idea the curtain was about to rise on a one-man show, with a cast of dozens, and the entire restaurant as our audience. The gift I had planned wasn't a piece of jewelry or a legal document. It was a carefully choreographed, perfectly executed, and very, very public scene. A scene that would change everything. The seeds of my counter-performance had been sown 6 months earlier. It started with a series of small, almost unnoticeable lies from Amelia, a charity board meeting that ran late, a gallery opening in another city that she had to attend for the weekend. They were plausible, but they felt wrong. The system of our marriage, once a predictable, if strained, rhythm, was showing signs of critical failure. I am a builder. I understand that any structure, whether it's a theatrical set or a marriage, is only as strong as its foundation. I started to run a quiet diagnostic. My workshop is a wonderland of technology. I have 3D printers, laser cutters, and a sophisticated surveillance system I installed myself after a break-in years ago. The cameras cover every angle of my property, including the driveway and the front street. One evening, after Amelia had left for a yoga retreat, I reviewed the footage from the camera pointing at the street. I saw her drive away. An hour later, a sleek, black convertible I didn't recognize pulled up and parked a few houses down. A man got out. He was tall, dressed in clothes that were aggressively casual and expensive. He walked up to our house. Amelia opened the door before he even knocked. They kissed. A long, passionate kiss that was nothing like the perfunctory pecks on the cheek I had become accustomed to. He went inside. He did not leave until the next morning, just before dawn. I watched the footage, my heart a cold, heavy stone in my chest. The man was Richard Thorne, a notoriously aggressive real estate developer and a new, major donor at Amelia's gallery. He was everything I wasn't: slick, ruthless, and dripping with the kind of new money that shouts its own name from the rooftops. This was the source of the system failure, a hostile third-party intrusion. I didn't confront her. What was the point? The evidence was clear. A scene then would have been messy, emotional, and pointless. It would have been her drama, on her terms. No, if there was going to be a scene, it would be my scene. It would be designed, built, and executed by me. I began to plan. I hired a private investigator, a discreet professional, named Carla, to document the affair. I didn't need proof for myself. I needed it for the legal battle to come. Carla was good. She provided me with a detailed dossier on Richard Thorne, including his financial situation. He was, as I suspected, heavily leveraged. A man living on a mountain of debt, using the illusion of wealth to secure the next big deal. He wasn't an upgrade. He was a liability. The centerpiece of my plan, however, was not legal or financial. It was theatrical. I knew that Amelia's greatest fear was public humiliation. She had spent her entire adult life curating an image of perfect, effortless success. My goal was to create a single, unforgettable moment of public theater that would dismantle that image completely. I started by calling in favors from my world, the world she so thoroughly disdained. I reached out to a group of actors I had worked with for years, a talented improv troupe known for their public performance art. I hired a dozen of them for a special, one-night engagement. I also contacted a friend who was a master of special effects and lighting. I began to write a script. The setting would be this dinner, the final dinner, the one she would inevitably call to lay down her terms. I knew her playbook. The climax of my scene would revolve around a single, dramatic reveal, and it would be a reveal that leveraged my own unique skills. My business, Vance Fabrications, did more than just theatrical set. My real niche, the one that was surprisingly lucrative, was in creating hyper-realistic, museum-quality historical and anatomical models. I had built everything, from a perfect, scale replica of the Globe Theater for a museum, to a functioning, cutaway model of a human heart for a medical school. For this performance, I was building my masterpiece, a perfect, 1:1 scale replica of a Fabergé egg, the famous imperial coronation egg. The original was worth tens of millions of dollars. My replica, made from cast resin, gold leaf, and Swarovski crystals, was a work of art in its own right, indistinguishable from the real thing to anyone but a trained expert. The egg was the prop, the centerpiece of the final act. I knew that Amelia, the art expert, would be unable to resist it. It was a lure designed specifically for her, and she was about to swim right into the trap. The dinner began just as I had scripted it in my mind. Amelia laid out her demands with the cool precision of a surgeon. I listened, nodding occasionally, playing the part of the defeated, overwhelmed husband she expected me to be. I let her control the first act. "So," she said finally, placing her fork down with an air of finality, "I think that's all perfectly clear. My lawyer will have the papers drawn up. We can have this all settled within a month. It's very efficient, Amelia, I said, my voice neutral. You've clearly thought this through. I believe in being prepared, she said, a line so ironic it was almost painful. Now, I said, leaning forward slightly, before we conclude our merger, I have something for you. A parting gift, if you will, for all our years together. This was not in her script. A flicker of confusion, then suspicion, crossed her face. I signaled to the maitre d', a man I had spoken to earlier that day. He nodded curtly. This was the first cue. A moment later, 2 waiters approached our table. They were not the restaurant's usual staff. They were 2 of the actors I had hired, dressed in immaculate tuxedos. They moved with a synchronized, theatrical grace. One of them was holding a velvet-covered tray. On the tray, under a small silk cloth, was an object. They placed the tray in the center of our table. "What is this, Robert?" Amelia asked, her voice sharp. "A gift," I said simply. "Go on. Open it." With a theatrical flourish, the second waiter whisked away the silk cloth. There, glinting in the dim, artful light of the restaurant, was the Fabergé egg. It was magnificent. The light caught the thousands of tiny crystals, the intricate gold latticework. It looked, for all intents and purposes, like a priceless treasure. Amelia gasped. Her art director's eyes, trained to recognize beauty, and more importantly, value, widened in shock. The other diners at the nearby tables, their attention drawn by the formal presentation, began to murmur. They saw the egg, they saw Amelia's reaction, and they began to whisper. "Is that?" A woman at the next table asked her husband, her voice a stage whisper that was meant to be overheard. Amelia couldn't take her eyes off it. Her greed and her expertise were at war with her suspicion. It was impossible, of course, but it was also perfect. The weight, the detail, the sheer audacity of it. "Robert, what is this?" she repeated, her voice a hushed whisper now. "Where did you get this?" "I made it," I said. She laughed, a short, sharp, dismissive sound. "Don't be ridiculous. You make scenery. This is a masterpiece." This was the moment. The second cue. I looked over her shoulder, towards the entrance of the restaurant. As if on cue, a man walked in. He was a distinguished-looking gentleman in his 60s, with silver hair and a perfectly tailored suit. He was another of my actors, a man with a booming theatrical voice and an air of unimpeachable authority. He was playing the part of a famous art world authenticator. He walked directly to our table. "My apologies for the intrusion," he said, his voice resonating through the now silent restaurant. "I was dining across the street when a colleague called me. He said there was a rumor that a remarkable piece was being displayed here tonight. May I?" He gestured to the egg. Amelia, completely starstruck and flummoxed, could only nod. The authenticator produced a jeweler's loupe from his pocket. He leaned in, examining the egg with an expert's eye. The entire restaurant was watching now, a captivated audience. He spent a full minute examining it, humming to himself. Then, he straightened up. His face was a mask of awe. "Incredible," he declared, his voice booming. "The craftsmanship, the detail. It is, without a doubt, a perfect lost Fabergé, the legendary Tsarevich constellation egg. I thought it was just a myth. This is a discovery of global importance. My dear woman," he said, looking at Amelia, "you are in possession of a national treasure. It is priceless." Amelia's face was a study in pure, unadulterated ecstasy. Priceless, a national treasure. Her mind was racing, calculating the commission, the fame, the auction at Christie's. She looked at me, a new, predatory light in her eyes. The divorce settlement she had just proposed suddenly seemed laughably small. She had just hit the art world lottery, and then came the third cue, the most important one. From the other side of the restaurant, a new voice cut through the air. "That egg belongs to me." The new voice belonged to a woman, another of my actors, who was now striding towards our table. She was dressed as a glamorous European heiress, dripping with jewels and righteous indignation. She was followed by two large, imposing men in dark suits, also actors. The scene was escalating, exactly as I had planned. "That is the Chernikov egg," she announced, her accent a perfect, vaguely Eastern European concoction. "It was stolen from my family, by the Bolsheviks. I have been searching for it for decades. You," she said, pointing a finger trembling with theatrical fury at me. "You are a thief." Amelia's face, which had been a mask of triumph, now collapsed into a rictus of panic. The priceless treasure she had been mentally auctioning off was now stolen property. The dream of a record-breaking commission was being replaced by the nightmare of a major international incident. "I assure you, madam, I am no thief," I said calmly, standing up to address my accuser. "I am a simple craftsman. I create things. Perhaps there has been some misunderstanding." The authenticator stepped in, playing his part perfect. "Madam, I understand your passion, but this is a delicate matter. We must handle this with discretion." He turned to the maitre d'. "Please, call the police, and someone from the State Department's Art Crimes Division. We must secure the ass." The maitre d', who was in on the entire performance, nodded gravely and hurried away, pretending to make a call. The restaurant was in an uproar. People were standing up, craning their necks. Cell phone cameras were starting to appear. Amelia was trapped in the center of a rapidly escalating, very public and very humiliating spectacle. She was looking back and forth between the furious heiress, the serious authenticator, and me, her face a mess of confusion and terror. "Robert, do something," she hissed at me. "This is a disaster." "I thought you didn't want a scene, Amelia," I said quietly. The first genuine words I had spoken to her all evening. The final piece of the performance was about to be put in place. Richard Thorne, her lover, who had been waiting at the bar as instructed by Amelia, now decided to make his grand entrance. He swaggered over, trying to project an aura of control. "What seems to be the problem here?" he said, putting a possessive hand on Amelia's shoulder. "My dear, who are all these people?" The heiress turned her fury on him. "And who are you?" she demanded. "I am Richard Thorne," he said, puffing out his chest. "And this woman is with me." At that moment, a woman who had been sitting quietly at a corner table stood up. She was holding a professional-looking camera with a long lens. It was Carla, my private investigator, playing the role of a tabloid photographer. "Richard Thorne," she shouted, and a flashbulb went off, momentarily blinding everyone. "Is it true you're leaving your wife for gallery director Amelia Vance? Is this the priceless egg you bought to seal the deal?" A second flash went off. Richard and Amelia were caught in the glare, their panicked, guilty faces immortalized. They were no longer just part of a scene. They were the headline. Richard, the married man, caught with his mistress. Amelia, the director, caught up in a scandal involving a stolen, priceless artifact. Their affair, which they had conducted in secret, was now a public spectacle. The meticulously curated images of their lives were being shattered in a hail of flashbulbs and accusations. Amelia looked at me, her eyes pleading now. The rage was gone, replaced by a desperate, dawning understanding. She finally saw what was happening. This wasn't a random series of unfortunate events. This was a production. It was a meticulously designed, perfectly executed, and utterly devastating piece of theatrical revenge. And I was the director. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. The scene she had wanted to avoid had become her personal nightmare, and the quiet, boring man she had dismissed had just proven that he was, in fact, a master of making a scene. The culmination of the performance was designed for maximum chaos, and a clean exit for me. As the fake photographer snapped more pictures and the heiress and the authenticator argued loudly over the jurisdiction of the egg, I quietly placed a thick envelope on the table in front of Amelia's lawyer, who had been summoned by Amelia, and had arrived just in time to witness the crescendo of madness. "These are my terms," I said to him, my voice barely audible over the din. Then, I turned and walked away. No one noticed me leave. They were all too busy watching the show. I walked out of the restaurant and into the cool night air, leaving the firestorm I had created to burn itself out. The envelope I had left contained a single sheet of paper,
It was a settlement offer. It was simple, non-negotiable, and the complete opposite of what Amelia had proposed. I would retain the house and my business. She would get a one-time lump sum payment that was fair but not extravagant. Custody of the children would be split 50-50, and there was a final, crucial clause, a comprehensive and mutually binding, non-disclosure and non-disparagement agreement. It essentially gagged both of us from ever speaking publicly about the other, or the details of the divorce. It was my final act of control. I was giving her a choice: take the quiet, dignified exit I was offering her, or face the public humiliation of the story that was currently unfolding in that restaurant. A story that, without a gag order, I would be free to tell to anyone who would listen. The next morning, my lawyer received a call. They accepted my offer. All of it, without a single change. Amelia's appetite for a public fight had, it seemed, completely vanished. The aftermath was swift and brutal for them. The story of the Fabergé egg incident became a piece of local legend, a salacious piece of gossip that ripped through the city's elite social circles. Richard Thorne's wife filed for divorce the following week, citing his very public affair. The scandal, combined with his already precarious financial situation, caused his development deals to collapse. He was ruined. Amelia, her reputation in tatters, was quietly fired from her position at the gallery. The board of directors did not appreciate their director being the star of a tabloid scandal. She took the settlement money and moved to another state, disappearing from the world we had once shared. She had gotten what she wanted, a life without me, but it was not the life she had envisioned. The children were, as always, my primary concern. The divorce was hard on them, but the 50-50 custody arrangement allowed me to be the father I had always wanted to be, free from Amelia's constant management and criticism. I took them camping. We built things in my workshop. I taught them that life wasn't about the finished product, but about the joy and the mess of creation. Our relationship, which had been strained by the tension of a failing marriage, began to heal and grow stronger. A year later, I was in my workshop, putting the finishing touches on a set for a local Shakespeare production. My son, now a teenager with a burgeoning interest in engineering, was helping me. He was holding the replica of the Faber egg, which now sat on a high shelf in my workshop. A strange, beautiful souvenir from a battle I had won. "Dad," he said, turning the egg over in his hands, "that was the craziest thing I've ever heard of." "Did it really happen like that?" "It did," I said, smiling. "But it wasn't just crazy. It was a piece of theater." "Why did you do it?" he asked. "Why not just let the lawyers handle it?" I stopped what I was doing and looked at him. "Because your mother told me not to make a scene," I said. "And sometimes, when someone tells you not to do something, it's because they are terrified of what will happen if you do. Sometimes, a scene is the only way to make people see the truth. It's the only way to take back the stage." He nodded, a slow, dawning understanding on his face. He placed the egg carefully back on the shelf. He had learned a valuable lesson that day. A lesson about art, about performance, and about the quiet, unassuming man who was his father. My name is Robert Vance. I am a set builder. I spent 15 years of my life trying to be the quiet, stable background character in someone else's play. But I have learned that I am, and have always been, the director. And the final act of my marriage was the greatest, most satisfying and most profoundly just scene I have ever built.